I am your co-host, Jack.
And I'm the other co-host, Thea, and welcome to Radio Free New England. We, the New England Independence Campaign, or the NEIC, are a 501c4 organization composed of a broad and rapidly growing coalition now numbering in the thousands of members and climbing, and spanning from liberals to socialists to libertarians and moderate conservatives alike. We desire full autonomy and independence as a peaceful and reasonably sized nation that acts with integrity and functions as a democracy we can all be proud of. We're inclusive of all, no matter who you are, no matter the circumstances of your birth, no matter what you believe. As long as you're interested in a free, inclusive, and democratic New England, you're welcome in this organization.
We did our best to assemble something of an introductory piece of the history of the U.S.'s imperialism, its war crimes, and the extent of its logic and humanity-straining military-industrial complex. And then, how much it costs us, all as citizens of our soon-to-be Republic of New England, and why we know that an independent New England will be able to do better. Let's start out with the basics. What's up with foreign policy? What's so bad about it that we're making a whole episode about this? Well, really, first off, the U.S. backs coups in other countries.
Yeah, I mean, it's pervasive. It is constant, the United States' involvement in its foreign policy everywhere but its most staunch allies is a repeated story again and again and again of blatant and unapologetic, just if you don't agree with us, if you're not aligning your policies with our interests, our international interests, we are going to remove you from power. We are going to interfere with your elections. We're going to kill you. For all the indignance that the American establishment displayed about how Russia might have, and it seems to be the case that to some degree that Russia was messing with the past couple of presidential elections, the U.S. has done no better. The U.S. has, between 1946 and 2000, interfered with more than 80 contentious elections. This is twice as many as every other country combined. The U.S. makes up 70%, a little more than twice as many. The U.S. makes up 70% of these instances of election interference. It's absurd, and it's kind of hard to be cognizant of the scale of it when you've been so immersed in American culture, where it's so easy to feel like the rules-based international order is something that's stable and coherent and intellectually and morally consistent, but it's not. Could
you give some more detailed examples of coups and invasions? I'm not that expert.
Yeah. So our research team put together a great list here. We're just I'm gonna go over it nice and quick, because if I went through all of it, we would be here for an hour. Starting out early on, Hawaii, 1893. The Fruit Corporation, the Dole family, straight up overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy with explicit backing from the U.S. The 1980s, Nicaragua with the Iran contract affair. The U.S.-backed regime in Guatemala all throughout the 20th century that ended in a genocide, funded by U.S. aid, mind you. Panama, around 1990, we just straight up invaded Panama. Let's be very clear. Thousands of troops, naval and air power, because they were not exactly being, as nice to us as we wanted them. Invasions of Iraq in the 90s, Haiti in the 90s. This is one that people don't know as much about. CIA backed a military coup to oust the president, Bachchan Baptiste. Then in 1994, America restored him back into office. Then in 2004, CIA forces overthrew him again. If you ever want to wonder, maybe part of why Haiti's so unstable, why it has so much trouble, just probably look at Washington, D.C. That's all I'm saying. 2001, obviously, Afghanistan, regime replacement and getting rid of the Taliban.
Which failed.
Well, we know how that turned out, right? Only stable while we were there, shooting anybody who didn't want it to be stable, and the moment we left, they're back in power. Especially with the invasion of Iraq, 2003, if you want any reason, if you want to be able to point at anything for a reason why the Middle East is so unstable right now, why it's such a disproportionately war and civil strife-filled region of the world, it's because of American interventions. It's because any time there was any kind of stabilizing government, and yeah, Hussein was pretty awful, he was a stabilizing influence. You get rid of him, all of a sudden there's all these terrorist groups that are a lot more easy to maintain, a lot more easy to get around.
Classic power vacuum situation.
Yeah, and I mean, look at Syria, the same thing happening again and again and again. America's unhappy with somebody, and they get rid of them by naked, blatant force, and the people they replace them with are nowhere near an improvement. And this is just a tiny little list. If you can, I mean, just go up to the Wikipedia article.
There's a lot.
Yeah, it's a long one, and that's probably not even all of them.
It's also not just wars and assassinations. The U.S. also uses disinfo campaigns and tries to manipulate the public of other countries through other means than direct force. Yeah,
I mean, it's it's not as popular nowadays to straight up assassinate other world leaders. Not that the U.S. has entirely stopped, but the internet and communication and stuff makes it a little harder to do clandestine operations like that. But it makes it a lot easier to do exactly what we were accusing Russia of doing, getting involved, using huge bot networks and coordinated social media campaigns and embedding U.S. operatives and advocates for our foreign policy and news organizations and stuff like that. It's everywhere. The degree to which, I mean, we mentioned, I think in a previous episode, how in order to weaken China's influence in Southeast Asia, the U.S. deployed a huge misinformation campaign about how Chinese vaccines were, dangerous, and this has killed thousands of people because now, people in the Philippines don't trust vaccines, not just China's COVID one, but all of them, because the U.S. was facilitating that. And it's everywhere. I mean, the amount of elections that the U.S. has sort of carefully and quietly interfered in by promoting candidates that support them more strongly than others, that could be its own whole new list.
So what does all that mean about the moral high ground and ethics in government? Are we the bad guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. That's not a we are the bad guys. Although I wouldn't necessarily say strongly that we aren't. But so many of the things that the United States accuses, hostile or rogue nations of doing, and their enemies like Russia and China, we're doing those too. And we're not even really necessarily doing less. I mean, if you just look at the number of illegal and unjustified wars and invasions and military interventions in the past, especially, after the end of the Cold War, the U.S. is on the top of the list. Nobody else is doing that much. Not even Russia, the big bad guys, are doing that much. And I mean, they're doing more than others, but and more specifically, because sometimes military interventions can be justifiable. War crimes aren't, right? The U.S., it is absurdly pervasive, the amount of war crimes the U.S. commits and gets away with blatantly. When people say that U.S. presidents are all war criminals, it's not like a, raving loon going, just using whatever exaggerated language they can to make their political opposition look bad. No, I mean straight up, by the standards of the Geneva Convention, by the standards of UN resolutions on war crimes, every single president since Bush the first Bush, not the second one, should probably be in prison. Without hesitation, I can say that happily. And, the degree to which it goes not accounted for in America. I mean, one of the, I think we are maybe marginally better than some other countries in terms of prosecuting war criminals internally, but still, I mean, 130 out of 572 perpetrators of war crimes in Afghanistan were convicted, and the convictions were very mild, short sentences. Sometimes the punishments were just extra duty or demotions. Commanding officers very rarely faced punishment, and it was laid on the shoulders of the soldiers who did it rather than the ones who gave the orders to. And a lot of times, even when they were convicted, they weren't even punished at all, completely circumvented. I mean, pervasive civilian casualties. Obviously, it's
one of the
absurd.
big points.
What is it, like 2 million?
One of the big contestable points of a lot of the U.S. warfare is the civilian casualties, as well as some more recent conflicts as well.
Yeah, I mean, let's, what was that? What was that Obama did? He redefined a combatant in terms of, like press releases and internal documentation as, I think, 18-year-old or older male within the vicinity of a combat operation. That was a combatant, in order to, dial down the casualty numbers for when they were hitting, random weddings with drone strikes.
Great. More data manipulation.
Yeah. And, the use of WMDs. I mean, America is a world leader in nukes and high precision range and high speed nuke technology. We've got, and, I mean, Russia's, this is something we're nice and even on, which isn't a good thing. Russia does it too. We've all got nuclear subs probably within, 500 miles of each other's capitals and all that.
But this also ties into our military industrial complex.
Yeah.
So
that's that can be a whole episode on its own, honestly. But the degree to which, like our government is in some ways very beholden to the major corporations that benefit from these wars. What else do we do? What else do we accuse Russia of doing that we're also doing? I mean, just generally terrorizing people worldwide. There we go. Global spying. Every time you hear somebody getting like up in arms about how China is like in all your phones.
Oligarchy is another one I hear thrown at Russia a lot, but that
and Russia.
That's hardly debatable.
Is doing? What do you think the CIA is doing in every country on Earth? We know that Ancestry. What is it? 23andMe.
Oh, the data leak.
Sells its
genealogical
genealogical data to the government, right? Like it when you aren't immersed in this kind of knowledge and you hear somebody talking about it, and like some of you listening to me might be feeling this way, like it does kind of sound like conspiracy theory stuff, but they're open about it. You can go into old CIA files. They did all that. They still do it. Snowden leaks. That was like, I think for people who weren't really around before Snowden leaked all this stuff about the NSA, like I think people weren't really cognizant of that. The degree to which the United States just monitors everybody, always, constantly. Look up the Five Eyes program. I mean, like with consent from all these other nations, even our alleged allies. They've got this military base in Australia that Australians aren't even allowed to like go into. All of that. Performing coups, obviously hacking elections, just like, Russia maybe did in the U.S. election in 2016. Maybe in 2020 they were certainly trying to influence it. Maybe in 2024. We do that to so many countries. I don't know how those people can stand in front of the news and get all pissy about Russia getting involved, as if we haven't done that to millions and millions of people all around the world. And, outside of all this, like political and military intervention stuff, like I see a lot of people talking about how Russia is kind of like backward and stuff like that, or, how China has this like kind of cultural backwardness. Do we really have room to talk on that? The amount of xenophobia and racism in the U.S., the degree to which fundamentalist Christianity dominates politics, even in ways that people aren't cognizant of. There are 7 states where it's still illegal for an atheist to hold public office. That's ridiculous. That's like 1920s shit. And, can we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance, right? You make all the kids in your country stand and salute the flag and pledge obedience to the flag, and in the name of, God. They don't like, I've been to China. Like, they do that there. They don't, there's not a lot of other places in the world besides, like, the U.S. and China and, a handful of, like, sort of, very ideologically motivated dictatorships that do anything equivalent to that. Last thing, economic backwardness too, like, yeah, sure, like Russia's obviously not very well managed. The U.S. is the only developed nation in the world without government health care. It's got some of the worst labor laws. It's got some really bad economic structures. Where do we get off judging all these other people for that sort of thing?
So what does this mean for New England? Like, how does this actually impact us? We've gone over a lot of context, but not really spoken with respect to New England in particular as much.
Yeah, just a bunch of facts.
Obviously, there's the tax burden from war and all of the secret military operations, which are not probably covered under war. We're paying off part of 6.5 trillion in interest on the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, and the part of the cost isn't even considered in that because of a bunch of financial wizardry that took place during the wars.
Yeah, and I mean, all of this, remember, is draining New England pockets, vastly disproportionate to our voting power, right? And we talked about this last episode, but we're spending so much more money than we give back, and we don't have decision-making power to reflect that. Our population and the amount of resources that we provide to the U.S. isn't reflected in the way that politicians in D.C., politicians from Middle America, from the West, from the South, are able to drain your pockets to fund their wars. And in the broader scheme of things, let's be really clear about this. American representatives in Congress and presidents and the entirety of the federal administration, except for a very small number of people willing to take a stand, are unwilling to represent the interests of their voters. We've become exactly the same sort of thing that we once hated, that we once fought a revolution to free ourselves from.
Yeah. So do we really want that? Would an independent New England be better?
Yeah. And that's the crucial question, right? Because we can rave all day about all the evils of the U.S., and I think it's a lot of these things. I'm sure listeners are already aware of a good portion of these. They probably aren't very happy with them either. But the question remains then: is this organization, if we succeed, if this movement succeeds, and we get an autonomous or an independent New England, would that be able to save us from these issues? Would we be able to step back? Would we no longer have to be throwing all this money, and would we no longer be committing all these genuine crimes against humanity all across the world? Well, we were thinking about this. I think there are 4 things that we could say that lead us to be on a range from somewhat to very confident that an independent New England could be better. On a basic level, we'll have learned from the U.S.'s mistakes. The structure of American democracy is fairly robust, that it's lasted this long with only one civil war, that it's been contiguous for, hundreds of years now. We're coming up on 250. It's impressive, and, I don't think we should throw out everything about it. But the founders didn't anticipate the degree to which the executive branch was able to have power now. And, if we were able to go back to how things, their intent, right? But be able to apply it to the way that modern structures are, look at other countries that are more able to have accountability for their executive, we'd have a country that wouldn't have that same kind of unilateral decision-making interventionist power as the CIA, as the Department of Defense. These executive departments are virtually unaccountable. They have been for decades.
And they aren't installed by voters.
Yeah.
There's no ballot. There's no reflection of public interest. It's all very, very indirect how our wishes get reflected in these various branches of government with power over our lives.
Yeah, we're so insulated from the actual decision-making process that, of course they're doing horrible stuff without accountability and oversight. It's not democratic anymore. And so that ties into the next one, right, which is that a smaller government, literally smaller, fewer people, less money in it, less space it's occupying, is going to be more accountable to its citizens. A smaller nation will be able to have a better handle. Its populace will be able to have a better handle on what its government is doing. And a smaller nation just won't have the same kind of military strength as the U.S., which is actually a good thing. We don't need this kind of overwhelming military dominance in the world. We just need to be able to protect ourselves. And the U.S., as much as it says it's doing that, when it's going around assassinating democratically elected leaders, when it's going around intervening and starting wars all around the world, it's not. On a very simple level. If we were smaller, our government wouldn't be able to unilaterally make the decision to invade another country because we just wouldn't have the strength to. We'd need allies. And when we got to bring allies together, it would have to be such a concretely justifiable war that I'd be confident in saying, if something happens, right, and we have reason to believe that we have to invade somewhere, I'd hope, that if it is justifiable, I do actually trust other countries like the EU, like Canada, like maybe the broader United States to support us in something like that. But right now, with the way things are, the U.S. president can just decide to kill people in another country, and nobody can stop them. I don't think that's appropriate.
It's considered part of his official duties, in fact, and he will be exempt from it.
And so a third thing, and this is getting into sort of more complex, like geopolitics and macroeconomic stuff, but the U.S., the petrodollar, which is essentially the fact that the United States dollar is backed to a significant degree by the U.S.'s control over oil trade, and the fact that the oil trade is conducted in dollars by American companies, that obligates the U.S. to maintain the strength of those oil, extraction and refining and distribution companies in the countries that they operate in, which is a lot of why you get all these invasions. Like when the U.S. goes to war for oil, it's not like literally we're conquering a country so we can do blatant extractive colonialism like like in the 1800s. It's a lot more complex than that. But if the New England is gonna have a new currency, I can say that confidently. I don't know what it's gonna be. That's not a question that we can say now. But the dollar is tainted in a very fundamental way by the fact that in order for the dollar to remain the dominant global currency, the United States has to keep invading countries. They have to keep oil stable and expensive. They have to maintain dominance over the sale and the processing and the distribution of oil. And decoupling New England from the petrodollar will mean we no longer have that geopolitical obligation to maintain this managed strife in the Middle East and in other places that produce oil. And so we'd be able to step away from it. We'd be, as attached to it as, Canada or the EU, and maybe we'd get dragged into wars every once in a while, but we wouldn't have to be starting them all the time. Because, the U.S. has to. In order for the U.S. to be the global hegemon, it has to be starting all these wars. I don't want that. I don't want to be involved in that.
I don't want that either.
Yeah. And so I guess, there we go, another nice little segue into this fourth point, which is, this isn't as much about what we'd be doing, but that, an independent New England wouldn't be inheriting most of that tainted legacy of the American empire, of all the evils that it's committed worldwide. We won't be inheriting that. We won't be inheriting the image of that. And so people who will hate America aren't going to hate New Englanders in the same way. We've made a stand. We've stepped away. We've declared that we're not willing to be involved. We're not willing to lay claim to that name that's been behind millions and millions of deaths. And, when I was typing this up, I realized, if we manage to separate, at the very least, the next 9/11 isn't going to hit the Prudential Building in Boston. It's they're going to go after somewhere in the broader U.S. And when we've made a stand and we've said that we're not involved, they're not going to go after us. We're not the enemy anymore, and it's a little self-centered, but I think it's an important thing to mention too. I think that is all. So today we have talked about, we've just gone over a big old laundry list of various things that American foreign policy and American interventionism has led to, and it's the amount of horrors is just, it's hard to conceptualize sometimes. It feels kind of alien and unreal and separate, and like you're just reading like a history textbook and like a sci-fi story, and the degree to which just America is so invested in being able to continue to do this is the reason why it keeps happening, and we've talked about what does this mean? What kind of impact does this have on New Englanders, right? Like, obviously there's the tax burden, and New Englanders are dying, but I think really the most, as much as those are terrible things, it's all because we're not represented. We don't have a voice. We're not able to make a stand and say, no, we don't want our tax dollars used for this, because the federal government makes the rules, and the people in the federal government aren't interested in listening to New Englanders. And we've gone over the last question, the most important one. Would an independent New England be better? Would we be able to step away from this incessant need to intervene, to start wars, to depose leaderships in other countries, to mess with elections? And yeah, I think I can be pretty confident in saying that we'd be better. I don't know if we'd be perfect. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's going to be this perfect utopia, but I really do believe that we would be better. And I think that is all for today. Thank you so much for listening.
We're with the New England Independence Campaign, and if you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to like, subscribe, and comment. Those easy little actions help boost us in the algorithm, and you can help spread the word. You can find other ways to connect with our community or any of our social media accounts on the website or in the description. And if you'd like to get involved or donate your time or money to making New England free again, check out our website, newenglandindependence.org.
And here's a toast to New England, since before until after.